Hello, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. I'm the Director of Communications at PFLAG National, coming to you from lovely Burbank, California. Well, my living room in lovely Burbank, California. And as always, we will be taking your questions and comments. And this week, especially, we really want to hear from you. So I am happy to introduce my partner in crime and colleague, Jean Marie Navetta, our Director of Learning and Inclusion. Hello, Jean Marie.
Hello, Liz, and hello to everybody from Palm Springs, California, in my office where it's extremely warm today. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. I'm really excited about today's show, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that it's really kind of hard to do this show today. As we look around what's happening in the United States, it's really difficult, and it feels hard to celebrate Pride Month, and it feels hard to celebrate our music when people are quite literally dying in the streets. And we thought about this a lot, but where we landed was, and this is where I landed, there's a time for us to work for social justice, and we are doing that every single day, and I hope that you are too. There's also a time to rest, and there's a time to build community, and this is our time to do that. So we're gonna spend about 30 minutes together building community, celebrating a little bit of Pride Month, talking about music, which is such a unifying force. And then when this is over, we're all going to go back to work again because Black Lives Matter and we need to have these conversations. But for the next 30 minutes, we're actually going to talk about music. And I am so excited about this particular show. So I have been hauling around for the past couple of months this book, David Bowie Made Me Gay. If you look in it, it's all marked up. It is written by Daryl Bullock, and it is just such a fantastic coverage of about 100 years of LGBTQ music. So I want to welcome Daryl to join us for today's conversation. So hey, Daryl, how are you?
I'm very well, and thank you so much for having me on.
I am so excited that you were able to join us. I've been obsessed with your book. I've had a highlighter in hand for the past 3 months. I can't stop reading. And it has just been so much fun. So I'm glad that you're here. So we've got a bunch of questions that we're going to be talking about. So the way we're going to do today's show is this. Daryl and I have got about 3 questions we're going to talk about. If you want to get those questions and the article that we're going to be using, which is the 25 essential LGBTQ pride songs from Rolling Stone, you can go to straightforequality.org and click on discussion series. So it'll give you those questions. So we're going to talk on those for about 15 minutes. And then we've got a bunch of questions for the people who are joining us today about their favorite songs and artists. So Daryl, one of the things that I think is interesting about the Rolling Stone list and some of the conversations we have about queer music is that a lot of the music that appears in here is not necessarily exclusively queer identified. Some of this is kind of crossover. It might be straight artists or cisgender artists, but there are queer influences, like it might be in the producers or the managers, people like John Reed or Brian Epstein, or even in the producing, like Wendy Williams and the Moog and creating that kind of music. So what do you think actually makes a song qualify as queer? What makes it part of this canon?
That's a really good question. I don't actually know the answer to that. I don't know what makes it queer apart from the feeling that you get. I mean, music is so emotive. It's viscerally emotive. It just grabs you, doesn't it, completely? And I think if it moves you, if it makes you happy, if it makes you sad, if it makes you dance, if it moves you emotionally, and it talks to you personally, then that can do it for you. You know, if you as a LGBTQ identified person identify with that song, that's kind of good enough for me to an extent. Although I think what's really important is that all music, all popular music, certainly going back to the days before jazz, has a base in the LGBTQ community. So it comes from it comes out of queer songwriters, queer performers, queer artists, queer musicians. There's inherently something queer, something gay, something lesbian, bisexual, transgender about pop music.
Yeah, and I think that really comes through in all of the different ways that it shows up. I have to say, I was talking to my best friend about this show before we came on, and he said to me, "Well, you have to mention Britney Spears," and I said, "But she's not queer," and he said, "But she's so important to us." So I think that really sort of makes the point that I think some people have become part of our community either because of what they did or how their music sort of became part of our soundtrack.
That's very true, and it's also you have the thing with what we might call queer icons or gay icons. You have that kind of diva, the Judy Garlands, the Chers, the Diana Rosses of the world, and then earlier the Billie Holidays and people like that, that principally gay men identify with because of the kind of drama in their lives. And so they all become part of the same whole, the same queer LGBTQ pop culture, if you like.
Absolutely. And, this sort of brings us to that second question, which I found particularly interesting when I was reading your book, which was the names of the people who often get left out of this conversation. And admittedly, some of that was because it was older music, so it wasn't current pop music. But looking at it, thinking about the influence of Tony Jackson on Jelly Roll Morton, or looking at the stories that you were sharing about the Harlem Renaissance, there was a line in there that there aren't any closets here. And that is something I think for a lot of people might catch them off guard. Looking at Ma Rainey, who, I love the story of her being busted for a lesbian orgy in 1925, and what a profound influence she had on music and on Bessie Smith. And even people like, you and I were talking, I said Joan Armatrading, who had a tremendous influence on women's music. And yet, a lot of people don't know her name. And I was just talking about how it was Melissa Etheridge mentioning her name that brought me to her. So could you talk about some of those artists? And a lot of them tend to be artists who are not white, too, which is interesting.
Sure. Yeah, happily. I mean, it's interesting. Most of the names you mentioned there are either black artists or female artists. And it's true of mainstream pop music, of straight pop music, and of queer pop music, that black voices and female voices have been erased or are often overlooked. That's partly because the industry is run by men, and there's no getting away from the fact that the music industry is predominantly run either by straight men or by closeted gay men who are too scared to come out and won't allow their artists to go, or certainly wouldn't in the past allow their artists to come out either, in case, it reflected upon them. So certainly post the Second World War, or in the lead up to the Second World War, sort of mid-30s onwards, an awful lot of what I would call straight washing went on, and a lot of queer artists, a lot of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans artists, and especially female artists are completely ignored or erased from the history there. And there are so many. Blues music would not exist without black lesbian singers. It just wouldn't. Jazz music would not exist without gay men. It's a fact. But what's worth remembering or worth kind of exploring is the fact that pre-1933, a lot of these names were known and were written about and were discussed, especially in the States, in newspapers, in scandal sheets, in what you would term the yellow press, quite openly. And their sexuality was discussed quite openly as well. And it's only really with the rise of fascism and the kind of move towards, well, actually, it's prohibition in the States, prohibition, and then the Depression, which kind of drives everything underground. And then the war comes along. And so for many, many years, these voices are either suppressed or completely lost. And it's only really when we get to really into the 1970s and 1980s when people feel free enough to start coming out again and start to be more obvious and more proud, more loud, more showy, if you like, about what they were doing.
Yeah, and I found one of the things I found really fascinating in your book was in fact the volume of evidence that this was very openly discussed. I mean, all of the reviews, the ads, and the stuff that is actually in the book show that these conversations were happening really openly. That line about, there's no closets in Harlem was so fascinating to me because it, I think, would challenge a lot of people's stereotypes of what actually was happening at that period in time in the US period, never mind in particular communities. Do you think that maybe, do you think that the internet and the fact that more people are starting to unearth this is helping more people get to some of these artists now? Do you think
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that people are writing about these artists, that people are rediscovering their history. The fact that we have had now for many, many years, LGBTQ historians who are delving back into our history and our history pre, the beginning of the 1900s. It's bringing more of this out of the closet and out into the open and putting stuff in the public domain that hadn't been there before. The great thing about the internet is we have all these incredible archives which are online that people can go and look at for themselves. You can go and you can search things like Brevities, which is an incredibly important newspaper for the Black community and for the jazz community in the 20s and 30s. They're there now. You can find them. For years, you couldn't find them anywhere. They were hidden in people's archives. They weren't in libraries. They just didn't exist. And now that stuff's out there. And it does make it a lot easier, certainly for me as a historian, for want of a better word, or certainly for a researcher, to get onto these incredible archives that exist worldwide: university archives, library archives, government archives, which are now available for us to browse without me having to leave my house in Bristol in England and fly all the way to New York Public Library,
Yeah, it really is fascinating. And to have this access and to have access to people who are having incredible conversations about these artists that are sort of putting them in the context of the larger conversation. So the one last question, and I think we've kind of gotten to this in a bunch of different ways, is how, do you think we can use this kind of music to bridge gaps? I mean, do you think there's a potential here that maybe we haven't always thought about, where we might be able to say, did you know that we actually do share something? Do you think there are opportunities of music to kind of build bridges?
Well, absolutely, but there always has been. You've only got to look at how a performer who has, for the vast majority of their career, been closeted or has chosen not to come out, when they do come out, takes their audience along with them. They don't lose their audience suddenly. I mean, Elton John is a prime example of someone who, for many, many, many years didn't talk about his sexuality, sang songs and still sings songs and writes songs about, straight couples, heterosexual sex rather than, male to male sex or sexuality. But everybody knows he's gay. Many has an issue with he's gay, and his entire audience went with him. He didn't lose a single fan.
It's true. It's true.
He didn't lose a fan.
Yeah.
There's so many other artists who have fantastic open followings, open fan bases. John Grant's a great example of someone recently who, is very, very open and honest about his own issues with everything from his sexuality to drug abuse to the way he was brought up. And his fan base grows by the day. You go to a John Grant show and it's at least 50% heterosexual, 50% queer. And it's probably getting more and more heterosexual people all the time. It's a growing audience. Music is, it's the lifeblood of what goes on. It carries all of us along with it. And just because somebody one male singer happens to sleep with a man, or one female singer happens to sleep with a woman, doesn't make their experience any less. It doesn't make their music any less valid. And it doesn't make their audience a bunch of freaks because they're listening to someone whose sexual experience might not be theirs.
Yeah. It still amazes me, having been to Indigo Girls concerts for more years than I care to admit to anybody in public, sort of watching that mix change, recognizing that it used to only be women. And now I go and I sometimes look around and I'm like, there are men here and they're with women and I don't understand what's happening, but suddenly we're all watching the same show together. And it fascinates me that people have sort of come together in these ways and bringing things together. So I actually want to turn this over and start talking a little bit about the people who are online, because I am seeing the comments scrolling by as we are talking, Daryl. And one of the first questions that we actually asked people was, what was the first song that you understood to be queer? So to actually be a song that was queer. Well, Daryl, do you have an answer for that one?
I don't. I can't think of something specific. I suppose it was probably something kind of Motown-y or something like that. Motown or soul. Because I'm in my mid-50s, so I was something I would have heard in the 70s. The first song I remember hearing that struck a chord with me personally was Tom Robinson's Glad to Be Gay, because it was the first time I'd heard a really angry song written from a gay perspective, and that totally resonated with me. But prior to that, it was, even though I wasn't, I wouldn't have been out at that point. I'd been in my teenage years. I was very aware of the kind of gay influence on disco. You couldn't get away from it. So it's probably something, soul, Philly soul, Motown, or disco, I guess.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I remember as a little girl hearing the song All the Young Dudes and thinking, what is this song about? And sort of having this recognition that it was a little bit different. And then that first time that I ever saw Melissa Etheridge and thinking, there. Although interestingly for me, my first awareness of anything was Annie Lennox, who is not gay, but seeing her in the 80s with her playing with gender was phenomenal. As we look at some of the comments here, we're seeing people say David Bowie, listening to Erasure. Someone said, I'm coming out. We've had people who are talking about Ani DeFranco too. And I'm sorry, I think I cut you off about to say something.
No, not really. I was just about to say that period, the kind of early to mid 80s, when suddenly, especially here in Britain, we were seeing bands like Bronski Beat and Frankie Goes to Hollywood featuring out gay men fronting them, for the first time ever was a revelation to me. And I think that was probably more at that time, that was more obvious to me and more amazing and life-changing than Bowie was. But obviously you look back and you see the influence that Bowie had, and I was always aware of Bowie, and you go back further and further and keep taking it through. You take it through rock and roll and right back again.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, you mentioned seeing like Jimmy Somerville, Small Town Boy is a big song. And then when you listen to Jimmy Somerville's solo stuff that became more activist focused as he did, I mean, he really, really plays it. If you've never heard his version of Don't Leave Me This Way, everyone should just stop and listen to it immediately. We also asked people about the most influential LGBTQ artists in their lives. We have definitely seen a few people mention things. I definitely saw Ani DeFranco pop up a couple of times. Somebody else mentioned Janice Ian. Toby, thank you for mentioning Joan Armatrading. I can't say her name enough. What other people are we actually seeing here? Do you want to talk a little bit about who really influenced you? Is there anybody? I mean,
the first big influence was definitely Tom Robinson for me, and that's just because that one song, that anthem, was such a head changer. It really was. It kind of opened me up to this whole idea that angry music, kind of punk new wave music, could be queer, and that was as somebody who at that point, let's say, what was that, 1978? So I'd have been 14 years old when that happened, and still dealing with my own sexuality and my own, going through puberty and all that kind of stuff, and just about at the point where I'm starting to talk to my father about my sexuality. That's an absolute game changer for me. But there are so many artists, and when I was writing the book, when you want to talk about influence, you go back to the women's music movement in the 70s, which was so important, how women were creating their own scene and their own vibe and making, not only recording, but distributing and selling and doing everything else, because the labels wouldn't sign them. The labels didn't want to know. If you didn't look like some flaxen-haired waif holding a flute, you weren't a singer, as a woman singer, you couldn't get a contract. There are so many massively influential singers that you might not know by name, but people like Meg Christensen, for example, there are so many people out there. Alex Dobkin, tons and tons of male and female artists that the names won't mean anything to you, but are massively influential. Klaus Nomi is another one that pops into my head, as somebody whose influence far outreaches, his sales and his very, very short period of fame.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting, when you started to write about women's music, it's so tied into political activism and sort of this feminist, we're going to have to do it ourselves because nobody else is going to do it for us, which was really sort of a fascinating chapter to read, because it explained in some cases why that movement of women's music stayed so strong, because the structures were built for it. We are seeing a lot of people, by the way, mentioning the Indigo Girls. We've seen them pop up several times. I think that was a lot of first access point for a lot of people when it comes to current lesbian music. The question that we also have asked people out there, because we've got about 10 minutes left, and we definitely want, if you have any questions for Daryl, to let us know, were your essential Pride songs. So what is on your essential Pride Month playlist? If you work at PFLAG, Pride Month is every month, so we have long playlists. Daryl, what do you think some of your contributions to your playlist might be?
It will always be Glad to Be Gay, and it will always be the live version that Tom did for a charity thing over here called the Secret Policeman's Ball, which I saw very, very late at night on television, and it just blew my mind completely. So that's an obvious one, but there are some, there's some big things. Bowie's Starman is a defining moment, especially for I think young or not so young now gay people who were growing up in the 70s, because that charged a generation. It gave people like Holly Johnson and Jimmy Somerville and Mark Almond and Boy George, the right to feel they could go and do something. So yeah, probably Starman will be in there somewhere. Yeah.
Somebody is putting up right now their essential Pride song is Sylvester's Mighty Real. And if you don't know Sylvester, you got to go do your homework now, everyone, because Sylvester was the original, incredible, amazing. There actually is a show that's out there about Sylvester called Mighty Real. I saw it in San Francisco a few years ago. It's phenomenal. In fact, the music was so good, the audience wouldn't go home. The performers had to come back out and sing to us some more. So we're seeing some people sharing their favorite Pride songs. We see Crucified from Army of Lovers. Anything from K.D. Lang. I'm Coming Out. I Want to Dance.
Dan, I know Dan. I just saw Crucified from Dan. I know Dan. He's lovely. There he is. Hi, Dan. Hi, Dan.
Let's see who else we have. 1 second. I'm trying to scroll while we read some of these things. The Greatest Showman. This is me from The Greatest Showman. What are you seeing on the list, Daryl, that you want to talk about?
Dan's just said Anything by Jackie Shane, and absolutely Any Other Way by Jackie Shane. What a record. What an amazing record.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Any Other Way.
Absolutely. We're seeing people talk about Closer to Fine, which was not on the Rolling Stone list. Proud by Heather Small. I'm so glad somebody mentioned Heather Small. I just want to start singing in her voice now, which I don't have, obviously. But I can dream. We can all dream. Small Town Boy has been mentioned. What other Pride songs do we have out there? I have to share. I have two, and it's really actually I have three. But I can do this because I'm running the show. So the Pet Shop Boys' Red Letter Day. To this day, when I hear the lyrics, it's still there's something a little bit heartbreaking in it to me, and kind of hopeful. And I don't think that any Pride for me is ever the same unless I hear Jimmy Somerville singing Don't Leave Me This Way, which is just, it puts you in a club when times are good and everything is okay. What other songs do we have out there? Somebody has just shared Rebel Rebel with us, which is absolutely necessary. Let's have a Kiki from the Scissor Sisters. Sorry. What other stuff needs to be on the list?
Sorry, Jimmy, I didn't mean to interrupt. Do you know a song called, there's a song by a guy called Valentino called Born This Way. It's not the Gaga song. That's a really important one. That's a really important one. First gay disco record, if you like, proper gay disco record. And that's from Motown again. There's some really interesting stuff happened in Motown around that period with the Temptations and all sorts of stuff going on.
And that's it's funny because when I saw the title of it, I sort of did a double take and then I remembered it. We actually have a question for you from Jamie, who asked, could you talk a little bit more about the chapter in your book on country music? Because that was one that I have to admit I didn't see coming.
Sure. Hi, Jamie. What can I tell you about it? Country is interesting because as a Brit, we don't really do country very much over here. It's a bit marginalized, probably like queer music is. But it fascinates me because it's such a obvious American genre. It's so important to the American psyche, country music. And yet there have been, gay country and LGBTQ country artists, I should say, for many, many, many decades. But it wasn't until 1974, I think I'm right in remembering, that a gay country album actually came out, which is Lavender Country by Lavender Country, or Patrick Haggerty, who's still around today, still performing, still recording today, in his 70s. Lovely man. And then from there, it all goes forward. You have so many people, right up to Drake Jensen in Canada, who's just released a fantastic new single called Burn the Floor, which is getting a lot of press currently. It's probably going to be his first chart hit. It fascinates me because it's a genre I don't know, but you'd expect it, or I would expect it. I shouldn't judge other people, but I would expect it to be a very kind of homophobic genre to work within, and it certainly has been in the past, but it does appear to be opening up quite rapidly.
It is. It's changing a lot, and it's also driven sometimes by some of the allies who are in that space, who have really created spaces for people. I mean, the biggest ones, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Dolly Parton as one of the best allies to our community, who has really created space for people and created a stage for people and talked about these issues, and basically used her fan base to create some absolutely, some new allies out there, and to create some bridges, which is really important. I mean, she's done music for the community, and she's pretty amazing. And somebody just wrote in, we all love Dolly, because we absolutely do. Somebody actually also just mentioned we should probably include Joan Jett, because she has not been mentioned yet, and it would be remiss in a conversation without her. So any last recommendations as we begin? We sort of start our Pride Month. Is there one thing that you want to send people to go listen to that they haven't heard yet? And I think I know one of the things, but a suggestion.
Oh gosh, you put me on a spot.
I did. I'm that kind of girl.
I'll tell you what, actually, what I'd love people to do, if they can find anything out there is some stuff on YouTube. Go and look for a band from the mid-1970s in London called Handbag. They were a rocky horror show influenced glam rock, verging on punk new wave trio who did some really interesting records well before anybody else. And they were signed, to Jet Records, which was the Ozzy Osbourne label. But they refused to put their records out because they were so queer. Tom Robinson was screaming about how great this band were, and nobody was listening to them. And they finally got an album released of their demos in Italy. If you can find any of their unreleased material or their live stuff, it's amazing, absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
Really important band.
That is it. Liz put it up on the screen for us. We have got Handbag. So start doing your searches, everybody. Daryl, I want to thank you so much for being here. This was so much fun. This is exactly, I think, what we needed. And you are going to come back and talk to us more. You've got another book coming up.
I've got 2 books coming out. I've got one ready to go, which we've unfortunately had to put to one side because of COVID. And I'm writing a follow-up to that, which is about 4/5 written. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we are going to see you again. Thank you so much, Daryl. And I hope you have a fabulous Pride Month.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for tuning in and listening in, and have a fantastic Pride Month.
Thank you, Daryl. And I want to thank everybody for participating. This was the fastest 30 minutes of my entire day, maybe my entire week, and it is because of you. I want to thank Daryl for joining us today, and for having such a great conversation. Thank you for everybody who has shared your stories and your songs and your recommendations. This is how we build community. This is how we stay together. So we are going to be back here next week. Not sure what we're going to be talking about. We'll figure it out as we go along, but same bat time, same bat channel. And as we close out, we will close out the way we do every single week with advice from the doctor. And that would be Doctor Who, of course, which is to run fast, laugh hard, and be kind. So please, most of all, please be kind. And if you haven't been outside and been kind to somebody lately, it's time for you to start extending your hand in a safe way, of course. My name is Jean Marie Navetta. I am the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. This has been Something to Talk About. Thank you so much, and we will see you again next Thursday. Bye, everybody.